It was an unusually quiet Thursday afternoon when Mr. Reynolds returned home after a long day at the precinct. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm glow over the manicured lawns of his suburban neighborhood. Everything looked peaceful, too. Peaceful, almost. But as he pulled into his driveway, something on his front door caught his eye. A small, yellowed envelope, awkwardly taped just above the doorknob. Curious, he stepped out of his car, the weight of exhaustion pushing at his shoulders, and pulled the envelope free. The return address read, Greenwood HOA Enforcement Office. His heart gave a slight jolt. He rarely dealt with the Homeowners Association, and when he did, it was usually for routine neighborhood updates or reminders about landscaping. But this envelope was different. Inside, a letter was neatly folded, and in bold type, the words jumped out at him. Dear Mr. Reynolds, you have been assessed a fine of $79 for violation of Section 3.2b of the Community Rules. Failure to remove your trash bin within the allotted 12 hours after pickup. Please remit payment within 10 days to avoid further action. He blinked. A trash bin? That was the entire issue? Mr. Reynolds replayed the last week in his mind. Sure, his trash bin had sat on the curb for a little longer than usual, but the neighborhood was no stranger to minor oversights. This wasn't exactly a crime. What caught him off guard, though, was the tone of the letter. It wasn't just a polite notice. The language was stiff, almost cold. Failure to comply will result in a lien against your property, it threatened. That struck a nerve. A lien? Over a $79 fine? It felt excessive, like the HOA was flexing its muscles unnecessarily. He tucked the letter into his jacket pocket and glanced up and down the street. No one else seemed to have any warnings or notices stuck to their doors. Was this targeted, or just random enforcement? Deciding to take a moment before reacting, Mr. Reynolds stepped inside. His wife was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. You won't believe what just showed up on the door, he said, unfolding the letter and reading it aloud. She raised an eyebrow. Seriously? A fine for the trash bin? He nodded, his fingers tapping the paper. Yeah, but it's the tone. They're acting like it's some major offense. Feels more like harassment than enforcement. Over dinner, the couple debated. What to do? Pay it and move on. Fight it. Mr. Reynolds, who had spent his career enforcing laws and understanding authority, felt uneasy. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It felt like a power move. The HOA was overreaching. Next morning, before heading to work, he decided to ignore the fine for now. He figured it might blow over if he didn't give it attention. But as the day progressed, his phone buzzed relentlessly. First, a call from the HOA office demanding payment, then a stern voicemail warning of legal consequences. His inbox flooded with emails, each more insistent than the last. Mr. Reynolds frowned, sensing the escalating pressure. Something wasn't right. He tried to contact the HOA board president, a woman named Karen Blake, but his calls went unanswered. Late that afternoon, just as he was heading out to patrol, two men in neat polo shirts and badges, obviously HOA enforcers, showed up at his doorstep. Mr. Reynolds? One said, his tone businesslike. We need to discuss the outstanding fine for your trash bin violation. Mr. Reynolds stood his ground, feeling a ripple of disbelief. The fine was just $79, but now there were enforcement officers showing up, at his door, pressing for immediate payment. It was almost comical if it weren't so frustrating. Look, Mr. Reynolds said calmly, I understand enforcement, but this is a petty issue, and your tone and tactics feel heavy-handed. Maybe we can discuss this like neighbors. The men exchanged a glance but said nothing more. They left behind a final warning notice taped to the door. Failure to comply will result in lien proceedings. As the door closed behind them, Mr. Reynolds' thoughts churned. He knew something had shifted. What started as a minor trash bin fine was becoming a battle, and he wasn't sure who was really behind the HOA's sudden aggression. One thing was clear. This fight was far from over. The morning after the enforcer's visit, Mr. Reynolds woke to a strange tension in the air. Usually, his neighborhood was calm and predictable. Today, it felt like a storm was quietly brewing just beneath the surface. He made coffee, glanced out the window, and noticed neighbors going about their routines as usual. Children waiting for the school bus, a jogger passing by, but the serenity was at odds with the unease in his mind. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the HOA, this time even more urgent. The fine wasn't just unpaid. They claimed he was deliberately ignoring their demands. The letter warned of escalating penalties and hinted at legal action. Mr. Reynolds frowned. The HOA's overzealousness was intensifying, and the threats felt less like community management and more like bullying. He thought about paying just to be done with it. But something in him bristled. The fine was petty, but the principle was important. If he paid now, he would be signaling to the HOA that intimidation worked, so he decided to hold his ground. That afternoon, as he finished his shift at the precinct, he received a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Reynolds? This is Jason Miller with Greenwood HOA Enforcement," said a sharp voice. "We're coming by shortly. You need to settle this $79 fine immediately, or we'll have no choice but to start lien proceedings on your home." Mr. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "You already came by yesterday. I'm aware of the fine, but I have concerns about how this is being handled." "Sir, the law is the law. Your neighbors have been cooperative. We expect the same from you." Before he could respond, the line went dead. Half an hour later, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find two men from the HOA enforcement team standing there again, their expressions unreadable but their posture firm. "Mr. Reynolds, we need payment today," one said bluntly, "or we'll escalate to legal action." The other gave him a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Reynolds looked them over. Both looked like they were used to getting their way, the type who believed rules were meant to be enforced without question. "Gentlemen," he began, "I'm not here to argue the fine's validity, but your approach, it's heavy-handed. There are better ways to handle community disputes than threats and intimidation." One of the men scoffed. "We're just doing our job." "And I'm doing mine," Mr. Reynolds said quietly. "I enforce laws too, but with respect. You're pushing a $79 fine like it's a felony. It's unprofessional." The tension thickened. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, the lead enforcer said, "You have 48 hours. Pay or face consequences." As they left, Mr. Reynolds closed the door and leaned against it. He could feel the weight of their gaze even after they were gone. He knew something wasn't right. This wasn't just about a trash bin. The enforcers weren't acting like ordinary HOA officers. Their persistence was personal. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the HOA's letter and bylaws on his laptop. The fine was legitimate on paper, but the threat of liens over such a small amount? That was a stretch, legally and ethically. The HOA had power, yes, but it was limited. Overstepping could lead to legal challenges, especially if residents felt harassed. His mind raced. What if the HOA was using this petty fine to cover up bigger problems? Maybe they were desperate, or hiding something behind their aggressive enforcement. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Mr. Reynolds resolved to reach out to some neighbors the next day, discreetly asking if they'd had similar experiences. He also considered leveraging his position. Being the county police chief gave him resources and knowledge the HOA didn't anticipate. As he turned off his laptop and headed to bed, a new thought struck him. This small battle over a $79 fine was about to become much bigger, and he was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Mr. Reynolds woke early, a simmering mix of irritation and determination sharpening his focus. After years in law enforcement, he was used to dealing with conflicts, both big and small, but this felt like something different, personal. He dressed quickly and grabbed his coffee, then stepped outside to check the trash bin, still where it had been, quietly waiting. His mind raced with possibilities. The HOA's aggressive tactics were escalating fast. He needed to send a message that intimidation wouldn't work on him. As if on cue, his phone rang. The caller ID read, Greenwood HOA Enforcement. He sighed and answered. "Mr. Reynolds, we're coming by in 20 minutes. It's time to settle this fine," the voice barked. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath and said evenly, "Fine, come on over." 20 minutes later, there was a firm knock on his front door. Mr. Reynolds opened it to find the two HOA enforcers from before, Jason Miller and his partner, a woman named Laura. They stepped inside uninvited, a bold move. Mr. Reynolds noted, their eyes darting around his living room as if assessing his house and status. "Mr. Reynolds," Jason began, "we're here to make sure you understand the consequences of non-payment. The board is very serious about enforcing community rules." Mr. Reynolds held their gaze calmly. "I understand enforcement, gentlemen. I'm actually the chief of police for this county. You're welcome to verify that any time." The room froze. Jason and Laura exchanged surprised glances. "You're the chief of police?" Laura asked, her voice a notch softer. "Yes," Reynolds said. "That's why I find it surprising that you two think bullying a neighbor over $79 is a good use of your time." Jason recovered quickly, clearing his throat. "Our job is to enforce HOA rules, no matter who the homeowner is. And my job," Reynolds countered, "is to uphold the law and protect citizens from overreach, which means I expect a little professionalism and a lot less intimidation." Laura shifted uncomfortably. Jason gave a curt nod but remained stubborn. Mr. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to make this difficult. But if you continue with these threats and baseless liens, I will take it up through the proper legal channels. And believe me, I know exactly how far those channels run." There was silence. The two enforcers suddenly seemed smaller in the presence of the county's top cop. Jason finally said, We didn't realize. This changes things." "It should," Reynolds replied. "I suggest you report back to your board and rethink this strategy. This fight over a $79 fine is pointless, unless there's something else going on here." Laura glanced at Jason, then back at Reynolds. "We'll report your position to the board." "Good," Reynolds said, his tone softening slightly. "Because I don't want this to escalate, but I won't back down either." The two enforcers left, the door closing quietly behind them. Mr. Reynolds closed the door and leaned against it, his mind racing. The revelation of his role as police chief had shaken them, but it also put a target on his back. Now, the HOA knew. He wasn't just any homeowner. They knew he was someone who could unravel their tactics and fight back with authority. That night, he called his deputy sheriff and shared the odd encounter. "This isn't just a petty fine," he said. "There's something fishy here. The HOA's behavior is off the charts. I want you to keep an eye on their activities." His deputy agreed, noting that HOA conflicts sometimes spiraled into bigger legal battles or even criminal investigations. Mr. Reynolds sat back, the weight of responsibility settling on him. He hadn't expected a simple trash bin fine to lead to this, but now that he was involved, there was no turning back. He knew that the HOA's aggressive push wasn't just about rules. It was about power, control, and maybe even hiding something deeper. As the neighborhood lights dimmed and the quiet of the evening settled, Reynolds prepared himself for the next move in what was quickly becoming a high-stakes showdown. Days passed, but the tension in the neighborhood thickened like a brewing storm. Mr. Reynolds thought the HOA enforcer's visit had marked the peak of their aggression. He was wrong. That Monday morning, he found a new letter slipped under his front door. This one was thicker, stamped with an official seal from the HOA's legal counsel. His eyes scanned the ominous text, due to non-payment of the $79 fine and repeated failure to comply with community rules, Greenwood Homeowners Association will be placing a lien on the property located at 154 Maplewood Drive, effective immediately. This lien will affect your credit standing and may result in foreclosure proceedings. Mr. Reynolds's jaw clenched. The fine was minor, but the consequences they threatened were severe and unjustified. He paced his living room, replaying his options. The HOA's move was a blatant escalation, a power play meant to intimidate him into submission. But Mr. Reynolds wasn't the type to back down. Not now, not ever. Later that afternoon, he decided to call the HOA board president, Karen Blake. After several rings, she finally answered, her voice cool and detached. "Karen, this lien notice is ridiculous. Over $79? You're overstepping," Reynolds said firmly. Karen's tone sharpened. "Mr. Reynolds, the board has rules. They're there to protect the community. We're just enforcing them." "Protecting the community doesn't mean threatening homeowners with liens for minor oversights," he retorted. "This feels personal and, frankly, harassment." Karen hesitated. "If you think this is harassment, maybe you should reconsider your position here." The line went dead. Mr. Reynolds sat back, the hostility now unmistakable. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were gunning for him. That evening, as he talked the situation over with his wife, she voiced what he was beginning to suspect. Maybe it's not really about the trash bin or the fine. What if the HOA is covering something else up? He nodded. The sudden escalation suggested desperation or a hidden agenda. Determined to find answers, Mr. Reynolds pulled out his laptop and began digging into the HOA's finances and meeting minutes, publicly available through the county's records. What he found raised alarm bells. The HOA was deep in debt. There were mentions of failed maintenance projects, unpaid contractors, and mysterious legal fees ballooning over the past year. Their aggressive fining was likely a cash grab, a way to squeeze residents to cover the shortfall. But that wasn't all. In the meeting notes, he spotted references to problematic residents and enforcement targets, a list that included his own address. Someone at the HOA board was orchestrating a campaign to pressure specific homeowners. Mr. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, realizing this was more than a simple neighborly dispute. This was an orchestrated power play designed to silence dissent and keep the HOA's shaky finances under wraps. He drafted a detailed report, outlining the questionable tactics and financial irregularities. If he was going to fight, he needed allies. The next day, he began reaching out discreetly to neighbors who had expressed frustration with the HOA in casual conversations. One by one, they shared stories: fines for minor infractions, unexplained fees, aggressive visits by enforcement officers. Together, they formed a quiet coalition, united not by the fine itself, but by the principle of standing up against bullying. Mr. Reynolds knew the HOA would push back hard. Their latest legal threat was a warning shot. But as chief of police, he had resources and influence on his side, and a determination to protect his community from abuse of power. As he prepared for the coming battle, he couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA's aggressive tactics were more than just about money. They were about control, and he was ready to take that control away from them. The night was quiet, but Mr. Reynolds's mind buzzed with urgency. He sat at his kitchen table, lit only by the soft glow of his laptop screen, sifting through financial reports, meeting minutes, and HOA correspondence. The deeper he dug, the more troubling the picture became. The HOA's finances were in worse shape than he initially thought. Large sums were mysteriously missing or redirected to vague legal expenses and consulting fees. Contractors had been left unpaid, leaving some common areas in disrepair, and yet the board was aggressively fining residents to fill the gaps. What troubled Reynolds most wasn't just the financial mess. It was the clear pattern of intimidation. designed to silence anyone who dared ask questions. He clicked through emails leaked by a disgruntled board member who'd recently resigned. They revealed internal discussions about targeting difficult homeowners, those who challenged the board's decisions or questioned their spending. And there he was, right in the crosshairs. Reynolds's training kicked in. This wasn't just about a $79 fine or even a lien threat. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to maintain control by any means necessary. He leaned back and thought about the neighbors he'd quietly approached. They all had stories, unjust fines, sudden property inspections, threats disguised as routine enforcement. This wasn't community upkeep, it was harassment. The next day, he called in a favor from an old colleague in the county auditor's office. They agreed to conduct a discreet review of the HOA's financial records. Meanwhile, Reynolds began drafting a letter outlining the HOA's questionable practices, intending to distribute it to residents. But he didn't want to act rashly. He needed concrete evidence, something undeniable that would expose the HOA board's abuse. He also decided to dig into the backgrounds of the key board members. Using public records and contacts from his police work, Reynolds uncovered troubling ties between the HOA president, Karen Blake, and a local real estate development company. The same company had recently lost a major contract with the HOA due to unpaid debts. Was this a conflict of interest? Was Karen using the HOA as a personal power base? The pieces were starting to fit together, a tangled web of financial mismanagement, intimidation, and personal agendas. Reynolds's resolve hardened. He couldn't let the HOA's abuse continue unchecked, not just for himself, but for everyone in the community. That evening, at a quiet neighborhood gathering, Reynolds shared what he'd found with a handful of trusted neighbors. Faces around him reflected a mix of shock, anger, and relief. They were no longer isolated, they were united. But the risk was real. The HOA board was watching, and Reynolds knew they wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. As he looked around the room, he felt the weight of responsibility. This was more than a battle over a fine. It was a fight for justice, for fairness, for the soul of the community, and the chief of police was ready to lead the charge. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Whispers of discontent that had long simmered beneath polite smiles were now bubbling to the surface. Mr. Reynolds had ignited something, a quiet awakening in the community. He spent the day knocking on doors, visiting neighbors one by one. Many greeted him with relief, ready to share stories they had kept to themselves out of fear or resignation. It turned out the $79 fine was just the spark. The real problem was the HOA's unchecked power. Mrs. Sanders, an elderly widow, recounted how she'd been fined twice for minor landscaping infractions, despite her physical limitations. Mr. and Mrs. Patel had been threatened with liens after refusing to pay fees they'd never been properly notified about. These stories painted a disturbing portrait of a board abusing its authority. As Mr. Reynolds gathered the accounts, he also heard murmurs of intimidation. Some neighbors reported seeing unfamiliar cars parked near their homes. Others described strange calls late at night, unsettling tactics that screamed retaliation. Word spread quickly. By early evening, a small crowd had gathered at the community center, a modest building usually reserved for bake sales and book clubs. Tonight, however, it was filled with concerned homeowners, eager to hear what the police chief had uncovered. Mr. Reynolds stood at the front, the weight of responsibility clear in his eyes. He laid out the evidence, the financial mismanagement, the targeted harassment, and the HOA's pattern of bullying those who spoke up. The room was silent for a moment before erupting into murmurs of disbelief and anger. "We've been afraid to speak out because of the threats," one man admitted. "But this changes everything." A woman near the back nodded. "I've been paying these fines without question. I thought it was just the rules. Now I see it's about control. Reynolds listened carefully, encouraging everyone to share their experiences. Each story added fuel to the growing fire of resistance. By the meeting's end, the group had formed an informal committee to hold the HOA accountable. They planned to attend the next board meeting en masse, demanding transparency and an end to the harassment. But the HOA wasn't idle. The very next day, Mr. Reynolds received a text from an unknown number. "Stop stirring trouble, Chief. This is your final warning." The message was a chilling reminder that the fight would not be easy. Reynolds showed the message to the committee. Far from deterring them, it steeled their resolve. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said. "We're fighting for our community, our homes, our peace of mind. We have to stand together." As the day turned to night, plans were laid for legal consultations, media outreach, and a coordinated effort to bring the HOA's misconduct into the light. Mr. Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA's retaliation was about to escalate. But now, armed with a united community and evidence of wrongdoing, he was ready. The small town of Greenwood had awakened. The quiet suburb was no longer a place where HOA enforcers could intimidate at will. This was just the beginning. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived with a tense energy hanging over the neighborhood. For weeks, Mr. Reynolds and the informal committee had prepared, strategized, and rallied their neighbors. What started as a minor dispute over a $79 fine had blossomed into a community uprising demanding accountability. The community center was packed beyond capacity. Chairs lined every wall, and neighbors stood in clusters, faces a mix of determination and anxiety. Local reporters had caught wind of the story, their cameras and microphones adding to the charged atmosphere. Mr. Reynolds stood near the back, quietly observing. Despite being the county's chief of police, he wasn't here to wield his authority. He was here as a neighbor, fighting for justice. The board president, Karen Blake, arrived with a group of stern-faced members. She scanned the crowd and immediately took a defensive tone. "We're here to uphold the community standards," Karen announced. "Fining residents for violations is necessary to maintain the neighborhood's quality and property values." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward. "Maintaining standards is one thing," he said firmly. "But what we've seen here is abuse of power, aggressive fines, liens over trivial matters, and intimidation tactics are not acceptable. This community deserves transparency and fairness." Karen's face hardened. "You're accusing the board without evidence." "We have plenty of evidence," Reynolds replied. "Financial mismanagement, targeting specific homeowners' threats, it's all documented." He gestured to the committee members who held copies of emails, financial reports, and accounts from residents. The room erupted with testimonials. One by one, homeowners shared stories of unjust fines, threats, and harassment. Mrs. Sanders spoke tearfully about her fines despite her disability. The Patel family described the fear of liens and broken promises. Karen tried to regain control, but the board's grip was slipping. More neighbors voiced their frustration, and reporters asked pointed questions. Realizing the situation was spiraling, Karen abruptly called for a recess. Outside, the tension boiled over. The board members huddled in heated discussion, while Mr. Reynolds and the committee spoke quietly with neighbors, encouraging calm and unity. When the meeting resumed, Karen offered a shaky concession. "The board will review all fines and liens issued in the past year. We will establish a transparent process for enforcement moving forward," she said. "We also invite community members to participate in board meetings." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Mr. Reynolds nodded cautiously. "Accountability is essential, and we expect the board to honor this commitment." As the meeting adjourned, neighbors exchanged hopeful glances. The fight had revealed cracks in the HOA's armor. But Mr. Reynolds knew this was far from over. Behind closed doors, the board's resistance would persist. The war for the community's future had only just begun. Still, standing among his neighbors, chief of police and homeowner alike, he felt a surge of pride. Together, they had stood up to an oppressive force and made their voices heard. The $79 fine that started it all had sparked a movement, and Mr. Reynolds was ready to lead it to the end. The aftermath of the board meeting left the neighborhood buzzing with cautious optimism. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, as if the oppressive weight of fear was lifting. The HOA board had promised reforms, transparency, and an end to their heavy-handed tactics. But Mr. Reynolds knew better than to trust empty words. He continued his quiet investigation, still concerned about the deeper roots of the HOA's behavior. His deputy's audit revealed glaring discrepancies in the HOA's accounts. Money diverted to personal accounts, unreported transactions, and suspicious contracts. It was worse than he imagined. But just when the pressure was mounting on the HOA board, an unexpected twist turned the entire battle on its head. One evening, as Mr. Reynolds reviewed new documents in his home office, a soft knock came at the door. It was Karen Blake. Her face was pale, eyes tired. "Can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. Reynolds nodded, gesturing her inside. Once the door closed behind her, Karen dropped her facade. "You don't know everything," she said quietly. "There's someone above us, a developer who's been pulling strings behind the scenes. The financial troubles, the intimidation. It's all part of a scheme to force homeowners to sell their properties cheaply." Mr. Reynolds leaned forward. "Who is this developer?" Karen hesitated. "A man named Richard Hawthorne. He's been buying land in neighboring towns, building luxury developments. He wants Greenwood next. The HOA board has been under pressure, some members threatened or bribed." Reynolds felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This was bigger than petty HOA disputes. This was a corporate land grab, using the HOA as a weapon to break the community's spirit and force them out. Karen continued. "I joined the board to try to stop it, but I was overpowered. I'm sorry for what happened to you and the others. I want to help expose this." Reynolds studied her carefully. After all the battles and mistrust, could this be genuine? "I believe you," he said finally. "But we need proof, and we need to act fast." Together, they began gathering evidence, emails, financial records, even recorded conversations exposing Hawthorne's influence and threats. Reynolds mobilized his contacts in law enforcement and local government. The story soon caught the attention of investigative journalists. Pressure mounted on the developer and the corrupt HOA board members. Facing exposure, Hawthorne's plans began to unravel. Lawsuits were filed and a county investigation launched. The Yais community, once divided and fearful, united like never before. Neighbors who had felt powerless now fought back with strength and solidarity. In the months that followed, the HOA board was replaced with honest, transparent leadership. The liens were lifted, fines reversed, and the neighborhood began to heal. Mr. Reynolds watched with quiet satisfaction. What started as a small dispute over a $79 fine had revealed a conspiracy threatening the very heart of their community. He had stepped in as the chief of police, but in the end, he stood as a neighbor protecting his home, his neighbors, and the future of Greenwood. As the sun set over the peaceful street, Reynolds knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the smallest battles uncover the biggest truths. And standing up for what's right, no matter the cost, was always worth it.